Welcome to Leaders Talks. I am Mandy, founder of LeadAvant AI, and on this series I speak with leaders who have built real expertise, solve complex problems, and have lessons other leaders can learn from. Today's guest is Steve Cochran, a program director for public sector at Banetti. Steve's background stood out to me because Banetti's work is very specialized in important space, enterprise asset management, IBM Maximo, public sector, implementation, reliability, compliance, and operational systems. These are not just technology buzzwords. These are the systems that help organizations manage critical assets, improve, reduce risk, and operate more effectively. Steve, thank you again for joining me today. To start, can you share a little bit about your journey and how you got into public sector work and enterprise asset management?
Yeah, it's a long journey, but I'll try to make it short. I started off in the United States Navy, working in combat information center, controlling basically flying planes into each other, not away from each other. From there, I moved into the Department of War space, working with the combat systems and computer systems for the DoD and implementing those into the Navy. Pivoted from there to going to work with FEMA. And while I was at FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, I implemented the LPMS, Logistics Process Management System, which is basically IBM taking over a very manual process that was very intensive and long, arduous bureaucracy, and moving it and implementing it into a system that Maximo uses to control the disaster housing or temporary housing for disaster survivors. So Maximo would track from cradle, purchasing the housing, all the way to disposition of the housing and everything in between. It's still being done today because the system hasn't been implemented. It's supposed to be implemented in September. RIT 6, they're still doing it by hand, by pictures, and by whiteboards, and using Excel spreadsheets. In the new day and age of government, they're seeing that is not a model that anybody wants to go by, and there's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse in that model. I implemented Maximo into that, and then I retired from FEMA and moved over to Banetti to be a public sector director for Banetti. They were very private industry space, oil and gas, Johnson & Johnson, doing those kind of implements. I'm here to help them move into the government space.
For someone who is not deep in the EA or Maximo world, how would you explain what Banetti helps organization actually do?
I'll go with the private sector, even though I'm not the best person to talk for Banetti on the private sector. But the way they help is the implementation and making that across the board for every company easy and as quick as possible, especially right now as we go into the Mass 9 implementations. We concentrate very much on making those implementations and those upgrades seamless, quick. And the biggest thing is the data conversions, that all this data that people have in their systems, everybody wants all this data. Oh, I got all this data, but some of it might not be good data. And I don't want the bad data coming into this new implementation or this new upgrade. I want to kind of take out the bad data and but I have to have the good data. We are experts on going through that process and making it very seamless for the customer. In the public sector, in the government sector, we're often doing the same things, but in a much more regulated and much more step-by-step bureaucracy type environments. It's been a pain point. I'm always transparent. It's been a pain point for Banetti because in the private sector, we're very nimble and we want to be able to move and get things done, and we don't have the bureaucracy. And then you get those engineers and those really smart Maximo people and try to get them into a arena where it's very chaotic, very bureaucracy, very slow and methodical. And sometimes that's pain, but that's what I'm here for, to get them through and manage that offset or those differences as much as possible and as best as possible.
And what does success usually look like after a strong implementation?
Of course, customer satisfaction, but I always go back to my program groups: cost, schedule, and performance. If you're the customer, you get two, I get one, and hopefully all three of those come together and we meet. If you want cost, I'll give you schedule and I'll give you performance. If you want schedule, I'll give you cost and performance. Getting those the successful is the work of both the customer and the implementer, in this case, Banetti, to get through. That's often the hardest part, right? Is for both customer and implementer to understand the requirements, understand the work statement and the scope, and get it done as fast and as cheap as possible so everybody profits from the implementation.
One thing that stood out to me is that Banetti works in environments where execution really matters. The public sector systems, reliability, compliance, assets, heavy operations, these are not simple projects. What makes the public sector transformation different from the private sector?
I'll use the FEMA implementation that is so much different. Is in government, when you're implementing, you got to go through a thing called an authorization to operate. This is a big bureaucracy for what they call the CISOs, the people who are in charge of the IT systems, want to know that everything, all the vulnerabilities are taken care of, and that they're not going to get cyber attacked and go through a monstrous, sometimes 6 to 12 month process to get it through that compliance authority. So you can't do anything until you get that. You can't implement, you can't start any work, you can't get on a computer, you can't get on a mainframe. So getting the government to work through all these problems and work through all these case studies and how we're going to implement all these regulations and get it through fast, because again, you can't do anything until you have that authorization to operate. We know in the FEMA thing that was the most difficult, but we did it in, instead of 6 to 12 months, we did it in 3 months, because Benetti knew how to work with the what they call the federal FedRAMP. That's a whole place where all the servers reside, and if they're FedRAMP authorized, that they can work in the federal world. We knew, working with our partners at IBM, how to get that and maneuver through all the minutia to get it faster and get it done, which expedited cost and expedited schedule, which also expedited performance.
Organizations seem to treat maintenance and asset management as overhead until something breaks. How do you help leaders see asset management as strategic instead of just operational?
No, you got to. Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one you think that would be simple, that if I can predict, let's say IBM Maximo predict, if I can put in the parameters of a pump and tell you when that pump is probably going to break, or if you don't do maintenance on that pump, you don't change oil, whatever you got to water, whatever you got to do, if you don't change that, it's going to break. And instead of 5 years, it's going to break in 3 years. Where Maximo helps anybody is that's a huge return on investment. And then you talked about earlier AI. With Maximo, with their AI, the ability to do that now with, I don't have to have Steve Cochran, the humongous water pump knowledge guy who knows exactly everything about the water pump and how it operates. I have to have that guy on staff to know all of these things. I now can have AI that has all the knowledge that's been previously published. That's the caveat. You got to have it published. You got to have all the data, all that stuff in the system. Now I don't need Steve Cochran, the super engineer on water pumps, because I got somebody who's going to tell me how to do that prediction and make that throughout my whole system, not just the water pumps, but the generators, the diesel engines, whatever you're operating on. You don't have to have one person of all those things. You have an AI that takes care of the majority of that. Now, the great thing about IBM AI on Maximo is everybody's worried about AI getting outside itself. IBM AI for Maximo stays in inclusive into the system because, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. If let's just say I'm running this whole water pump, diesel engine, generator thing, I only want the data that's inside of my system or my thing, my building, my complex. I only want the data inside there because if I'm going outside into the internet or going outside into something else, I'm bringing in outside things that have nothing to do with my world. So most people think of AI, oh, I'm going up to Elon Musk things and I'm going all over the internet and finding all this answer when really inside of IBM Maximo, the AI stays inside itself.
Can you share an example of a public sector organization or intensive team Banet helped where the work made a meaningful operational difference?
I, am going to go to FEMA, but I'm going to go to another part of FEMA. FEMA came to us after they saw what we did for disaster housing. Now you can understand that FEMA has 40,000 employees, and when a disaster hits, let's say Florida, that they got to deploy 5,000 people that are out of the blue. They basically have what they call reservists or corps. Also, these are people who are like you and I right now doing their regular day jobs. A hurricane comes through Florida and they get called to go react to that. They're called reservists. So they don't always have laptops. They only have their own laptop. So now they got to get issued a laptop. They got to get all this stuff that they need to be in the field to help the survivors of a hurricane, earthquake, tornado. So FEMA came to us to track their assets, all these laptops, because they were once again doing it all by hand or by Excel spreadsheet. So they could track where all their laptops were and what state they were. In other words, what operating system did they have? Has it been updated? When's the last time the battery got changed? All those things that people just take for granted, me and you take for granted in our house. But now I got to give it to somebody who's going to be deploying to the field. And not only that, but I might have to give it to a person that's deploying the field that's 75 years old and might not have ever worked on a computer or has very limited work on a computer. So you got a lot of things in the asset management stream in that you need to track and follow. So we are implementing Maximo to do that for FEMA, their chief information officer, so we can do all that.
So, what made that implementation successful?
What that made that successful? Whew, it was hard because you're trying to going back to the disaster housing, you have all these people doing everything by hands. And you have a lot of people, and especially in the where the new administration is coming in, where they're trying to reduce the size of people and modernize government so we don't have all these people. We had the blowback rate is a natural thing of people don't want to lose their jobs. They want to keep their jobs. They want to keep it manual. So the success for Banetti and for IBM Maximo and the asset management was that we got the user buy-in. They understood that the loss of information and the catastrophic not knowing where everything was, because if you can believe, I take a picture of something and I don't know if that person meant it was an O or a zero. So let's say I put a zero in there. Now it's just completely ruined everything inside of the whole system. And somebody's got to go track that down and figure it out. Maximo with itself, they saw that's going to make that job so much easier. So you got user buy-in when you wouldn't expect to get user buy-in, and they started really feeding the system and feeding the Benetti with requirements and what they wanted to see the system do, which made us much more, when you had that interaction with the user, it makes it so much easier and more successful in the long run in the implementation. And we've seen that.
And how do you help different stakeholders understand the value?
Let's see. We have user juries, what we call user juries. When we go out before we field a part of the systems, I told you before, cradle to grave. Inside that cradle to grave is 7 what we call silos of how the housing goes from contracting to getting built, to getting inspected, to getting put in the survivor's hands, getting maintenance while it's in survivor's hands. Then when the survivor gives it back or says, I've got a new house or my house is now built, giving it back to the government, and then the government either dispositioning it or demolishing it. And when I mean disposition, they tend to take these things and sell them on eBay or some government website and get money back from them. So when you take those stakeholders, and I was the stakeholder at one time. Now I'm the person implementing into the stakeholders. So all the way from the head of FEMA all the way down to the person is working this, we've had these user juries. So you get the contracting part out and you have a user jury. Is this what you wanted? Is this going to work for you? What's working for you? What isn't working for you? And we let them look at it in a very simplistic part of it and then give us feedback. And we could take that feedback and we use Agile to, if you're familiar with Agile, we use Agile implementation to make sure we get that done, get those corrections done in the fastest manner. And we can always pivot off of something we're not doing right into another thing that they either bring up to us or we find to be a better way to do it.
So, as we were talking earlier about AI, where do you see AI, automation, or predictive maintenance changing enterprise assets management over the next few years?
Just like everything else, I'll tell you, I have a little personal bias. I am AI. I think it's going to take over completely how asset management, EAM is going to be done. However, the hard part of the AI thing is businesses to believe what I said earlier before, that it's maintained inside itself. Because I'm used to mostly the public sector, but it very much in the private sector. And you can think oil and gas, and especially these heavy regulated Johnson and Johnson pharmaceutical type deals. They want to make sure not only that other data isn't coming in and spoiling their data, but their data is not getting out to another company and they're seeing it. So you don't want to, excuse me, and I'm sure there's a lot of FDA controls that I'm not really sure about that you got to think AI's really got to be regulated. So the good news is with Maximo AI, you're not getting outside your system, but you're going to have to make sure that the CEO of Johnson and Johnson understands that and you can prove that and how it's going to help them inside their infrastructure, which it is. And it's not too hard to show that the return on investment. I said, when you can build a database of the smartest people, all the publications, and it can all be referenced and all the logs of that thing, be it, let's just go back to a generator, how many times the oil was changed, how many times the belts were changed, how many times it got up, software was upgraded, all those things, it can read all that, go to the manual, understand what the history of that thing is, and do that like that instead of at 2 a.m. when John's off and he's sleeping. Oh, we got to call John it back in. John doesn't want to come back in. All those problems kind of go away. That's where I believe AI is really going to pay off. And it's all the data that it can just immediately bring up to a person's fingertips is just going to be a game changer.
Where does the human expertise still matter the most?
Just like everything else, we got to ask. I'm sure you're dealing with this just like I'm dealing with it. I read a card from my daughter and I go, wow, that's AI. Or I get an email and it has the long dash in it and I go, oh, that's AI doing something. But there are those times, like any time, that AI doesn't, it only understands one way of doing things at this point. That's through a data look at everything. Think about, okay, we've seen Apollo 13, right? Think about that. How is AI going to sit there and go, you just blew out your oxygen tank. Here's everything you have on board. Fix me a filter that's going to save the oxygen. AI can't go out there and duct tape this thing together, put it all into something, whatever it's going to be to fit in there. It might be able to tell you, oh, you need 6 feet of rubber hose, you need a box, you need a this, but it can't put it all together and make it understand how it's going to work inside of that thing. I could be wrong. Maybe it could do that, but there's those kind of very engineering, or I've been there, done that, and I know how to do this. That type of thing. I think AI is not going to be able to do that for some time until, I don't know. It could be very fast, but at this point, we can tell things that are AI, and we understand that it was generated and maybe not to the point where a professional engineer was engaged to do it. Somebody like Steve Cochran went on AI and told him how to do it. I wouldn't want to be the guy going, huh, Steve Cochran just typed that into ChatGPT and there's the answer. I wouldn't want a generator to be fixed for that reason. Anyway,
I understand that. So how does Banetti usually get more opportunities? The one you helped.
the public sector, it's government is always hard because they an archaic way of contracting, archaic way of doing business. They got to put out RF sources sought, RFIs. We're currently working for or trying to get a opportunity at the VA for their medical asset management for all the Veterans Administration for all their asset management of all their medical systems, modernizing that. And it's hard because you got to go through all this process. And then even if you win, right? If Banetti wins this, then some other company goes and protests it. So you got another 5 months and you're going through this thing where you want to engage and get things done. In the private sector, it's a lot easier. It's of course there's still some of those types of RF requests for proposals and things, but it's also has to do with relationships and past performance and where they know that they've seen or they've interacted with another company and that company said Benetti implemented our stuff and they were great and we recommend them highly. So it gets a little bit faster because it's relationships and it's a very fast communication back and forth. We deal a lot. We're IBM Gold partner. We work with our IBM partners a lot to help them when they can't do the implementation or they need to do it in a more cost scenario, a better cost scenario than that they sometimes can portray. They ask us to come in and help them do that.
So does that mean that most of your opportunities are from referrals or word of mouth?
Yes. So a lot of that is through word of mouth and referrals, but we still go through like my day is mostly spent looking for RFPs and going out and you said getting connections with state and local government officials and telling them what we bring to the table and how we can do it and how we can do it in a cost effective, cost schedule and performance manner that suits them in their ways. Sometimes that's great. Other times they find somebody else who can do it better, faster, cheaper, or what they think that could be better, faster, cheaper. And let me just say that a lot of our work, I'll relay this. A few years ago, I was in Home Depot. I was going to do my floors. My wife wanted me to do the floors, and I've never done floors before, but I watched a couple YouTube things, watched TV, and said, "Oh, I can do that." So I walked into Home Depot, got all the tools, was buying the wood thing, and I saw a general contractor there, and I asked him a question about something and he pointed it right out. I said, man, you guys must be losing a lot of business because people like me are just doing them by themselves. He goes, man, let me tell you something. I got more business than I know what to do with because you guys start that flooring job and you mess it all up and you got to call me to come in and redo it all. I'm making more money than ever. So Benetti, we get a lot of that. We get a lot of somebody coming in going, we went cheap, it didn't work out too well, and now we need Benetti to come in and help us. We do that We get that kind of business a lot.
That's a very good example, actually.
Time. If I have a camera, I could show you all the stuff I'm messing.
We all do. For public sector leaders who know their asset systems need modernization but feel overwhelmed by the complexity, what advice would you give them?
That's tough because of the regulations they're under to do things. Like I said before, they go through this RFP process where it's a question. It's basically, here are all my requirements. Tell me how you're going to make the world better. Everybody's going to tell you how they're going to make the world better. But what is not allowed in the public sector, for the most part, is a connection like we just talked about. I can't go and just walk into FEMA's OCIO department and say, "Hey, how you doing, Bob? Give me a contract because you know I'm good. I know you're good. We can do this really." That relationship can't happen. Not to say that I can't go knock on the door and say, "Hey, how you doing, Bob? I understand you have a problem. We can probably help you." He's still going to tell me, "Well, that's great, Steve, but you're going to have to go through the RFP process, and you're going to have to go. I'm not the one who's going to decide. It's going to be a panel of people who decide." So that can be, hey, if a team can write a good proposal and somebody can come in and write it cheap just to try to get the business, and they know how they have good writers, then they're going to get business or they're going to win that proposal. That doesn't necessarily mean you pick the right person. And another thing that government has, me being on both sides, I've been on both sides of this in the DoD and in FEMA. You often get what you pay for. And also that government inherently doesn't get the best engineers to go work for them. And that's not just, it has nothing to do with other than engineers go to Procter and Gamble, they go to Starlink, they go to Google. They want to go to those places. When you tell a system engineer, "Hey, how would you like to go up to FEMA and write requirements on disaster housing?" You know, you're not going to get Stanford system engineers there. You're going to get, I don't know. I don't want to disparage anybody, but so the requirements aren't always what they should be. So we have to write a proposal to the requirements, which makes things, but you got to do it because if you don't answer what they're asking for, they're going to throw you out. So it's not always the most conducive thing because there isn't that interlocking of personalities, relationships, and that is needed when in private sector. And that's what makes them nimble, and that's what makes the world turn much faster in the private sector than it does public sector, which is the field I went into. Don't ask me.
So, Steve, before we wrap, where can people learn more about Banetti or connect with your team?
Just go to Banetti.com. That's, of course, the easy solution. But we have a ton of YouTube videos. They're really good. They're not up to Spencer Pratt's current videos or some of the greatest videos, but we have a CEO who's very dynamic, very young, and he explains Maximo in a way that I don't see in any other space. We're on LinkedIn. Steve Cochran's on LinkedIn. Banetti posts every week. We have about 4 or 5 people, including myself, that post articles about Maximo and how it relates to their specific space, be it medical, be it industrial, be it public sector. I have many articles on LinkedIn. That's Stephen Cochran on LinkedIn. And they'll go through everything in asset management, supply chain management, logistics, EAM, the medical field, gas and electric. But if you look at it for Banetti.com on YouTube, you're going to see probably 50 really, really good videos by our CEO explaining how Maximo is implemented and how we do things and how you can better do things with your implementations of Maximo.
Steve, this has been really a very valuable conversation. I appreciate how practical your perspective is. What I really took from this is that asset management, reliability, and modernization are not just technical topics. These are leadership issues, operational issues, and long term performance issues. So, thank you so much for joining me on Leaders Talks. I do appreciate you being here, and I will send you this episode.
I'll forward it to our COO as well.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and it was a pleasure meeting you. You take care, Steve.